On the morning of September 15th, 2014, amateur pilot Tim Castle was flying over the Sierra Nevadas when the propeller suddenly broke.
There must have been a guardian angel sitting in that right seat with him.
I survived the landing, and somebody was sent to find me. He answered all 5 of my prayers. I can tell you what I think needs to be told, and that is that this is a story of faith. That's why I think Tim is alive today. For many years, he's developed this faith. He has a gift of faith, as much or more than anybody I've ever seen. This is a man who has implemented that principle in his life.
With a background in mechanical engineering, Tim worked for several defense contractors his entire career. Then about 10 years ago, an interesting opportunity presented itself.
We got a call from my son, Aaron, who happened to be working in Death Valley National Park at a little place called Panamint Springs Resort. And he said, Dad, the guy's health is deteriorating and he wants to sell. And my first reaction was, why would I want to buy a place in Death Valley? So we made arrangements and went down to Panamint Springs Resort and literally fell in love with the place.
Because we prayed about it and got a good feeling, I thought, you know what, let's go for it.
By the end of February, we owned Panamint Springs, and 1st of March we took over.
Tim is a confident person. That enables him to build his own house and to build a resort or rebuild a boat or help somebody else rebuild their boat.
The most impressive to me is the balance that Tim has. With a person that's that skilled, you would think they would be much more into themselves. And I think Tim is probably one of the most humblest men that I know.
Everything about the family's new business was great, except for one problem. It was 7 hours by car from San Jose.
When I saw an airplane fly in and land on our strip, and I thought, well, that's really cool. My wife said, don't even go there. But I knew that that's something I had to do, and so I began looking to see if I could find an instructor. And I bought a Piper Cherokee.
With his new pilot's license, Tim began making regular trips to Panamint Springs.
In a year, he put more hours on his airplane than most pilots put on an airplane in 10 years.
She said, when I get up over 10,000 feet, I go to sleep. And she said, how can you sleep in that plane? And, you know, you're just so high up. And I said, I'm just comfortable with him.
Last September 15th, Tim took off from Reed Hillview Airport on another routine flight.
It was a beautiful, clear day. No clouds, no wind to speak of. Great flying conditions. As I cross over the edge of the Sierra Nevada mountains, right over what I call the Kern Valley, or the Kern River Canyon, I saw a flash of light and a huge vibration in the front of the aircraft. And I realized immediately that part of my propeller had broken off.
It throws the propeller into an imbalance to the point that it can be very violent. There was what we call a windmill effect, which was keeping the prop turning, which kept the engine turning.
The whole front of the aircraft would wiggle like this, and I was worried that the engine was going to fall off.
If the engine fell away, the center of gravity would shift to the rear, and it would be impossible to glide to safety. Looking to his left, he spotted a bowl-shaped canyon with a small lake that looked relatively clear.
If I can make it there, that's the place to land. Father in heaven, please help me survive this landing.
And there's the best rate of descent. That is about a 500 to 300 foot a minute descent. He came down at 2,000 feet a minute.
So the time span from the time I saw the propeller take off to the time I landed the aircraft, I think was less than a minute.
Can you pick out a spot that's smooth 3/4 of a mile away while you're fighting an airplane? And you're at 13,000 feet over some of the most rugged country in the United States.
And I could see this row of boulders that I was heading towards, and I have mechanical flaps on that airplane, and I grabbed that lever just at the right spot, and I pulled up on it and hopped right over those boulders. My left landing gear hit, and it sheared off. My wingtip hit the ground, and then the nose gear hit and sheared off also.
It wasn't until 6:30 that evening that I got a text message from Benjamin. And I said, Ben, you're making me really nervous. Dad should have landed at 1 o'clock.
I got a phone call from my brother. He said, well, I need you to go to Mom's house. Finally he said, well, Dad's plane is overdue. At that point, my heart kind of sank.
His phone was not in an area that he could get a message. So I knew he was down.
Tim crash-landed on a remote mountain in Sequoia National Forest.
And my head hit the instrument panel. I broke 3 ribs. I broke my eye socket in about 5 places. Broke my nose so bad that when I reached up to feel it, it was all wrinkled and pushed up. And so I grabbed my nose and pulled it back down into kind of a shape of a nose. And it sounded like the tinkling of porcelain sliding against each other, broken porcelain or something.
The force of the landing had also injured both of his ankles, fracturing one of them.
I happened to have a tow bar that had fallen out on the ground, and I used that like a crutch.
Instinctively, he tried to walk to the top of a nearby ridge to get a better cell phone signal and survey his surroundings.
And about an hour into the walk, I turned around, and I'd only made it about 100 yards. It would be dark before I even reached the top of the hill, and that to be out on that mountain in the dark was just asking for trouble.
He turned back, and as he lay exhausted in his plane, he said another prayer.
Father in heaven, please send someone to find me. And as soon as I said that, I didn't even finish, the prayer, and this thought popped into my head. Check your emergency locator transmitter, which is in the tail of the aircraft. I wouldn't have thought of it otherwise. And I pulled the panel down and unclipped it from its mount and brought it forward to where I could see it and flipped it to the on position. And that was about 3:30 in the afternoon.
With the daylight fading, he knew he had to prepare for the long night ahead. The mountain was still full of dangers.
I remember, too, because I'd dropped so much blood around, I remember praying to Father in heaven, please keep the big animals away, because I didn't want to be a meal for them. And I knew that there were bears up in that country, and a bear could have got in without any problem. And the wind was starting to pick up, and it was starting to get really cold. And I thought, I've got to be protected from this wind or I won't make it.
Despite his injuries and precarious circumstances, his thoughts also turned to his family.
Let my family know that I'm alive. I was concerned that my wife would be really distraught.
My brother Aaron contacted the FAA and the Civil Air Patrol to get a search started.
Within an hour, we had an aircraft in the air and were already starting to head towards his known flight path.
Then we checked the credit card and debit card receipts. We tried to figure out if he'd stopped in any of the airports that he normally stops at. And so we actually called those airports.
They ran scenarios based on what information they had to try and locate the crash site.
And I said, Scott, he has to be in this area. I think we were within about a 10-mile radius of where his plane actually went down. We all had the feeling that things were going to be okay. It was mentioned that if anybody can pull out of this, Dad can.
His clothing and the damaged cabin offered little protection from the freezing wind. Using what gear he had, and even parts of the plane, Tim improvised a way to shield himself from the elements.
And I put the Mylar over the fleece. Then I put the window coverings over my legs. And then I put the aircraft cover around me, and I completely in a cocoon. And that's the way I spent the night.
The temperature that night fell below zero.
I had to go to the bathroom several times during the night, had pee. And I have this little red Johnny on the spot, I think is what it's called. I was worried that I was filling it up, and so I took my little flashlight and looked down in there, and it was frozen.
In the middle of the night, he heard the sound of an airplane.
Nobody in their right mind would be up here flying in these mountains. In the dark, this time of night, it has to be the Civil Air Patrol.
Colonel Stokes told Aaron that they had located the beacon at 2 a.m.
It gave me hope and courage, to make it through the rest of the night, because it was really a miserable night.
Around 9 a.m. the next morning, he heard another airplane and rushed outside as fast as possible.
I heard it start to circle overhead, and I knew that they needed to see me alive.
They were able to determine was Mr. Castle. He was out of the aircraft and rather vigorously waving at them.
The pilot didn't believe the spotter in the back of the plane, and they had to do another pass so that the pilot could see himself, because he thought that the spotter was imagining that my dad was out there walking around, because it's just such a rare event.
And about an hour later, I heard voices, and I saw 2 Rangers hiking in, and knew that I wasn't going to have to spend another night alone on the mountain. Before I left, though, they wrapped my whole head up in gauze, and I said, "Is that so when they're wheeling me through the hospital corridors that people aren't horrified by my looks?" And the one girl, she was the medic, she says, "Well, basically, yeah."
A short while later, Tim was finally airlifted to safety and taken to the closest regional trauma center in Fresno.
He looked like somebody that wasn't a horror movie. Had significant lacerations, very complex facial fractures, orbital fractures, a talus fracture on the right, the nose fracture that was actually very impressive.
His good friend and home teacher, Dale Clark, rushed to the hospital.
And so he and my son, who is an elder, my son Scott, administered to me, gave me a blessing. He actually stayed. He got a hotel room also, and they all stayed the whole time I was at the hospital.
It turned out that Tim was not the average patient in several ways.
This is a trauma center that usually is dealing with car accidents and gunshots and a lot of violence. In the hallways, there were about 12 gurneys. About half of those 12, they were actually handcuffed to their gurneys.
Trauma patients are usually in a lot of pain, and they become very demanding, and they have a very different personality. Not him.
He was smiling, he was talking. He never lost consciousness through the whole ordeal.
They expected me to be just, in pain, and I was in pain, but I was so happy to be there.
After 24 hours in the ER, the hospital gave him what they thought would be welcome news.
Stanford says today they have a bed and they're ready to transfer you. He goes, "Disregard that. You guys have taken care of me amazingly, and I want to stay here." We all look at each other like, "Really? You want to stay here? You don't want to go to Stanford?" Everybody wants to go to Stanford.
We kept passing in the hall numerous prisoners that were shackled at their waist and feet with handcuffs. All these prisoners are looking at him thinking, what kind of gang fight was he in?
During his stay, Tim became a local celebrity.
And they were all coming in the ER room at the time to kind of just see the plane crash survivor, and he was extremely cordial to all of them.
He's a gift to us because he was very, very nice, very appreciative of all the work that the nurses did.
And I tried to treat them well, and as a result, I got treated really well. The physician's assistant, who kind of was taking care of me through the whole event, she would go out and buy me milkshakes and ice cream sundaes, and I don't think it was because I was, that great. It's just they saw me as a miracle.
More than once, people came in and said, "I'm not involved in your care, Mr. Castle, but I just wanted to meet you and say congratulations."
Some people would come in and say, "I've heard about you. I just want to touch the miracle patient," thinking it might rub off.
And then what was more amazing on all that is how quick he recovered. He was 3 days here and he was ready to go. He will not stay still in bed. He wanted to work with physical therapy right away.
His improvement was phenomenal. I was there for 3 days with him, and each day you could see a noticeable improvement.
The head of the hospital came about 3 days into the event, and he looked at me and he goes, 4 days ago you were in an airplane crash. So the next day he brought back another doctor. He goes, look at this guy. This is 5 days later. He says, this is a miracle.
We did a CT scan of his head and didn't show any bleeding or any injuries of the brain.
The speech pathologist who routinely did exams on head injury patients had a similar reaction.
She goes, you know, he didn't have any deficits whatsoever.
Tim acts always in a very calm and cool and collected manner. I've never seen Tim agitated or excited or let a problem get him down.
He didn't lose control of the airplane, and he didn't lose control of his composure. He stayed with it.
He has so much internal peace that you could see it even through pain.
When the doctors and the nurses and and even the people who are bringing me food come in and go, wow, this is a miracle, then it's something other than the norm. And I attribute it to that priesthood blessing.
After Tim went home, he gained a lot of attention as a survivor of an unfortunate accident, of circumstances gone terribly wrong. But some things had gone remarkably right.
We went and we started looking at the wreck. As a tube frame that holds the engine on, all of the tubing had buckled and cracked. Had he not throttled down his airplane, had the steel been just a little bit weaker, the whole front engine would have fallen right off of his airplane.
And if it becomes tail heavy, it goes into what is known as a horizontal spin. And there is no way you can recover from that.
His right wingtip fuel tank had drained upon impact, but there was no fire.
Normally when an airplane hits the ground, metal against rocks, there's sparks. I've had other people say, wow, that's unusual that you didn't, it didn't catch fire.
When you look at pictures, it doesn't look like it was that hard of a landing. When you go there and see it yourself, I don't know how he survived. I don't know how he landed the airplane.
Now, before I left my home that morning, I said a prayer, like I always do, But I also say, if it does fail, let it fail in a convenient place, or, kind of try to arrange that if you can. I think it was the best place it could have happened. A few minutes earlier, I would have been 12,000 feet above the ground, and it would have taken me 12 minutes or more to get to the ground. I believe the engine would have fallen off. A few minutes later, 10 minutes later, I'd have been on the other side of the mountains again.
I guess if your propeller's going to break, it was the best place it could have broken.
Perhaps this simple story of survival isn't as simple as it appears.
So about 3 weeks ago, we went up to Sacramento to go to a award ceremony for the Civil Air Patrol. Everyone gathered around my dad and shook his hand and basically said that you don't understand how rare this event is. When people go down, when people's airplanes go missing in that area, they're never found alive.
I was also supposed to call the National Transportation Safety Board inspector. She said, I'm so thrilled to be able to talk to you. We've had other incidents or accidents where we believe that a propeller has broken in flight, but we've never had a live pilot to talk to.
So why did this happen to Tim Castle?
The odds were stacked against him. He shouldn't have survived that. And there was one miracle after miracle that happened that suggests to me that this was a product of his faith.
Right off the bat, he told me that he had said 5 prayers, that they were reasonable things, like help me get the plane down, help me to survive the night.
The faith that I'm talking about goes way beyond just a miracle. it wasn't to be at all. He could have just told Tim, don't get in the plane. And in my view, Tim is a very spiritual person, and he would have heeded a prompting like that.
He never wanted for a minute for anyone to forget that it wasn't Tim alone that saved Tim, but that it was Tim with his Heavenly Father that saved Tim.
What is the nature of faith? What is a miracle? A few months after his accident, Tim Castle bought another plane.
He's going to speak on drawing on the powers of heaven at our stake, Know Your Religion. And I'm sure many people in the stake will think, because he survived the wreck, he must be qualified to speak on the powers of faith. And but they don't know the whole story. The whole story is, he had the faith before the accident. The kind of faith I'm talking about has three parts to it.
Prop clear.
One of it is in the book of Hebrews. It says faith is the assurance of things hoped for.
As long as they're sincere and meaningful, he hears them and answers them.
The second element is faith is a principle of action. Tim's a person of action. And then the third thing, it has to be in accordance with the will of the Father.
Watch over me and the equipment that it doesn't fail. But I also say, if it does fail, let it fail in a convenient place.
That's the faith that has power behind it.